Welcome this morning to Tulsa Family Church. We're going to start out with prayer. We've had several prayer requests that's come in. Let's go ahead and ask the Lord to be with us today as we go through the lesson that we have, and to be with those that aren't able to be with us here. Father, we thank you for this day, and we thank you for this time we have together. We ask that you would be with us. Touch those that aren't able to be with us now, Lord. Touch those that are ill. God, touch Bliss and my sister Liz, Lord. Bless these and move upon these, God. Touch Carter. Touch Jack, Lord. Move on their hearts and be with them, God. Touch their bodies and touch their strengths and touch their minds. We know that you can touch them and bless them. Be with them, Father. Thank you, Jesus. In your precious, wonderful name we pray. Thank you, Lord. Thank you, God. Thank you, Jesus. As we lift you up, we give you all the glory. We give you all the praise. Thank you, Jesus. We do have a congregational this morning. I didn't grab my book, but we'll just sing it off the. I know there's one here. 154. Y'all have it up there, but that way I don't have to turn around. A new name in glory. If y'all want to stand, you can, or if you're seated, it'll be fine too. I was once a sinner, then I came, pardon to receive from my Lord. This was freely given, and I found that He always kept His word. There's a new name written down in glory, and it's mine, oh yes, it's mine. And the white-robed angels sing the story, a sinner has come home. There's a new name written down in glory, and it's mine, oh yes, it's mine. With my sins forgiven, I am bound for heaven, nevermore to roam. I was humbly kneeling at the cross, fearing naught but God's angry frown. Heavens opened, and I saw that my name was written down. There's a new name written down in glory, and it's mine, oh yes, it's mine. And the white-robed angels sing the story, a sinner has come home. There's a new name written down in glory, and it's mine, oh yes, it's mine. With my sins forgiven, I am bound for heaven, nevermore to roam. In the book is written, saved by grace, oh the joy that came to my soul. Now I am forgiven, and I know by the blood I am made whole. New name written down in glory, and it's mine, oh yes, it's mine. The white-robed angels sing the story, a sinner has come home. There's a new name written down in glory, and it's mine, oh yes, it's mine. With my sins forgiven, I am bound for heaven, nevermore to roam. Excuse me. It's a little challenging singing. I want to sing the lower parts, sing the repeats and stuff like that. But anyway, I don't lead that much. That's why it's so difficult sometimes, but I appreciate everybody. Today, the story, the lesson that we have, I'm going to talk on Lazarus the beggar. Now, this is actually a story that Jesus put forth. Many times we call these parables, and they are parables. They can mean both a story and a parable. Normally, a parable is one that's illustrative. Both of them are. But a parable usually is one that may or may not have happened. It's a story to illustrate something. A lot of times we read things in articles on the web and the internet, and we think, oh, that's a great story. It may have never happened, because a lot of creative people put stories together, and you know, a lot of the fiction that we read, and this is not to say that it didn't happen, it's just we don't know. In this particular case, when we talk about Lazarus, this is the man's name. This is the only time that we realize or we recognize in the New Testament that Jesus used a person's name in there. He'd always say the blind man or whatever, you know, was going about, or the widow. And in this particular case, he called out Lazarus. So we feel very confident this was a story that Jesus knew about. We don't, you know, you can say the Lazarus that was Mary and Martha's brother. I don't think it's the same, but it could have been. So we see that all through here that this is something, and it goes on to describe the verses that was ahead of it. You can go back and read the first part of 16. We're going to start at Luke chapter 16 and verse 19. Okay, previous to this, it's here again, it's describing what's going on a little bit ahead of that. But in verse 19 says, there was a certain rich man which was clothed in purple and fine linen, and fared sumptuously every day. And there was a certain beggar named Lazarus, which was laid at his gates full of sores, and desiring to be fed with the crumbs which fell from the rich man's table. Moreover, the dogs came and licked his sores. As we talked about in the Old Testament, in our Wednesday night service, and also last week a little bit, it's a big disparity between the rich and the poor back in the Old Testament days and even the New Testament days. You had the rich that was usually really rich, and then you had the poor that was really poor, and then you even had those like this one, they didn't have anything at all. They had to beg to keep their life going. They may have been maimed, they may have been, you know, we see the blind man that had to, you know, request something to get, because a lot of times their family may have died, whatever, and they were their only support. And so we see as we go through this man, he was very rich, and Lazarus was at the gate. People knew him, knew of him, and they knew his circumstances. Now, one reason, in the commentaries, the things that I was reading about, talks about they wanted the crumbs from bread. And I've always thought that, you know, after you leave the table, if you go to a restaurant today, whatever, they go by a real nice restaurant. We don't go there very much, but when I was with the company, they would take us to nice restaurants, and they'd come by and they'd have their little bitty scoop, and they would go over the white linen table and scoop and scratch everything and scratch it into a bowl, all the crumbs and stuff that you may have had, may have left. And that's what I was thinking, they'd throw it out. That's not really what this means. They said the rich people, they didn't even use napkins back there. They used bread. Okay? They would have the bread, they'd tear it apart, and they'd kind of wipe their hands on it, because they ate with their hands most of the time. They didn't have the utensils. I mean, they might have had utensils, a spoon and fork, but a lot of times they just, even the rich, would eat with their hands. So they'd dry, you know, not dry them off, but wipe them off with the bread, and then that bread would be thrown over. And that's the bread that they're talking about that would be thrown out. And that's what, because, you know, you couldn't live off the crumbs. What I was thinking is like, man, he would be starving to death. Well, if you got big chunks of bread or pieces of bread that was thrown out, even if it's hit the ground, if you're hungry enough, you're going to eat it. You're going to take care of it. So he wanted just those pieces to keep him alive, to try to keep him to the next day. Most of the time, as we studied in some of the other verses, and as it gets towards the end time, the people, they're going to be working and they earn enough money to pay for what they're going to eat for that day or the next day. It's one day at a time. It's not like us. We get a check and it'll last us, we can go to the store and get 2 weeks of groceries or whatever you do, monthly groceries. That's not what they in those times, they got enough to maybe make enough so they can go get, after work, they would go give them the food, go give them the money, and they'd go get something from the market and come and get it and make it for that day or for the next day. So we see it's real disparity. This guy was so rich, he just used the bread to take care of his meal. To wipe himself off. He also talks about him being clothed with fine linens. We can think it talks about purple. Purple was a very costly material at the time to make it. They had to go get the flowers that they used, or whatever the dye, to make those different things, to dye them, and it was very costly to do that. So we see every day he was doing this. He fared sumptuously every day. He did this day in, day out. He could have easily taken care of Lazarus or whoever he wanted to, but he didn't. Next verse, 22, says, "And it came to pass that the beggar died, and was carried by the angels into Abraham's bosom. The rich man also died, and was buried. And in hell he lift up his eyes, being in torments, and seeth Abraham far off, and Lazarus in his bosom." So it comes time, and it shows us that both of them died. Both Lazarus and the beggar. And the rich man. Now, the rich man's never named. A lot of people call him Dives, D-I-V-E-S. That means rich in the old language, I think the Hebrew. So whoever it is, he died, and he was buried. He had his burial. I'm sure he had a big party and everything after him. Lazarus doesn't even say he was buried. He just says he was carried, he died and was carried by the angels into Abraham's bosom. So his body the animals may have taken care of it, drug it off, or they drug it out of the way and tossed him aside, because he was just a beggar. He meant nothing to no one, but he did to God. And that's why he says here, the angels carried him into Abraham's bosom. But it says that the rich man, once he was buried, he was in hell. And he saw Lazarus. He could see him. So he recognized who he was. Now, there's a whole nother lesson, and we're not going to get into it, on where they went. A lot of things, just real briefly, a lot of commentary and things people say it was the place of the dead, or the place of the grave. Their bodies, of course, went to the ground, wherever it was at, whether it was buried or not buried. But the spirit is what we're talking about here. It went to the place, and one of them was the place that talks about where Abraham's bosom is. That was, at that time, a place of rest. But the place of torment, was in another place. It's in the same kind of area, just a different floor, if you want to imagine it that way, or a different room. So it's enough that they could see through there, that they could see what's going on. And we talked about it, I know Brother Epperson has, and we have in our lessons. It's going to be so, it talks about being in torment, and we always think about pain and hurt and everything. It's going to be that, but it's psychological too. It's more in your brain. You can see somebody over there and they're faring greatly, and you're not. Why in the world? It's so unfair. Why is this happening? They had their chance at that particular time, and they didn't. But as we see later on, when Christ came, he said, and Christ is telling the story, Jesus is telling this story, when he actually died and was resurrected, in that meantime, he went down, and then he took those souls that was in the good place of that area and took them with him to heaven while he left the others there. And then later, at the end times, we'll see the lake of fire comes up, and those souls, the individuals, will be tossed into the lake of fire. They're still in torment, still in the place where they, don't want to be. Verse 24. Then he cried and said, Father Abraham, have mercy on me. Send Lazarus that he may dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am tormented in this flame. But Abraham said, Son, remember that in your lifetime you received your good things, and likewise Lazarus the evil things. But now he is comforted, and you are tormented. And besides all this, between us and you there is a great gulf fixed, so that those who want to pass from here to you cannot, nor can those from there pass to us. So we see a little bit clearer now the picture. They can talk to one another, evidently. They can hear or see, at least certain individuals, and they could tell them what's going on. At least we see that at that particular time Jesus was telling them. And he's doing all this to show them what the future is going to be. We are so caught up today in the material, in this world, that all this has to do, with what we can see, feel, and touch. Jesus is trying to get people to understand it's not so much that. It's not that at all. It's the Spirit, how you deal with people, how you act towards people, how each one of us respond. If the rich man had responded differently, to Lazarus, he might have changed. There's nothing basically Lazarus could have done, because he was in such a state he couldn't even hardly take care of himself. So Christ is trying to tell them the story, and once again it goes back, if you read just a few verses back before that, it's talking about the Pharisees and the Sadducees and how all the pomp and circumstance is going about. Don't be like that. Be like, what does the Word say? What does the Word teach? Go about and understand that, and that will get you where you need to go. Okay, and what he's teaching about it here again is, in his time, the law. It's still being with the law. So the rich man saw Abraham, and he said, have mercy on me. That time had already passed. There was, the mercy could have been given, but he said, I can't do anything about it right now. There's a gulf between me and you. It's kind of like seeing people across the street, maybe. You can see them and you wave to them, but you can't touch them and you can't get over there. Traffic's too heavy, or a river you see, or a creek or something you can't get across. That's what he's talking about. He said, okay, if you can't do anything about that, send Lazarus. Because we see there is flames here. It says the flames, he's tormented because of those flames. Send Lazarus over just to dip his finger in water and touch the tip of my tongue. So Abraham said, we can't do that. He can't get there from here. And you can't get over here from there. It's a gulf. Christ is showing us that there's a difference between, we can play a good game if we want to here on earth, but if we don't live the game, then it's nothing. We're nothing. It's all done for naught. So Lazarus could not help him. Abraham could not help him. He's beyond that time. When time he should have done it was when he was still alive in the physical. Excuse me, verse 27 through 31. Then he said, and this is the rich man, I beg you therefore, Father, that you would send him to my father's house, for I have 5 brothers, that he may testify to them, lest they also come to this place of torment. Abraham said to him, they have Moses and the prophets. Let them hear them. And he said, no, Father Abraham, but if one goes to them from the dead, they will repent. But he said to him, if they do not hear Moses and the prophets, neither will they be persuaded, though one rise from the dead. That's pretty powerful there as far as telling us we need to deal now what we're doing. If somebody rose up from the dead, it would be, quote, fantastic for us, but just like in our lessons on Wednesday night, when the Israelites crossed the Red Sea, such a fantastic miracle, and then just the next chapter, they're going back again. They start squabbling and start, Moses give us this, Moses give us that. Well, they just kept them from dying. Well, here, we need to do it. We need to act when we can act. He had 5 brothers, the rich man did, and he wanted them to be warned. Abraham said, look, they have the law. They have the writings. They have the Old Testament up to that time. They need to understand that and live by that. And he said, no, that's not good enough. If that's not good enough for them then, it wasn't going to be good enough if they sent somebody back, a miracle. Because again, it's just going to be a short period of time they'll believe, and then they'll go off on their own. It has to be rooted deep into us, deep in our spirits, to have that, to be able to want to do what the Word tells us to do. Now today, with Christ coming and His resurrection and His new life that He gives us, we still want to follow what He has taught us. He said, okay, everything, he told the rich man in another parable, you need to follow the law. And he goes, I've done all the commands, honor the father and mother, all these different things. And he said, yeah, you have, but you need to do one more thing. And in that particular case, it was to give up his money, all he had, sell all and follow me. He didn't want to do that. It's material. We get attached to material things so easily. And so we say, well, I'm not attached to that. Well, start thinking. We're attached to a lot in this world because this is what we live in this world. You say, okay, go sell your house, go sell your car, go sell whatever you've got, and go live for me. That's what the disciples did, basically. They went and followed him for the 3 years, and then afterwards they kept his message alive. So we need to follow him. He says, they have the Moses and the prophets. Let them hear them. And that wasn't good enough for the rich man. He said, no, he put words in his mouth. I wouldn't even follow that. Well, that's your problem right there. You wouldn't follow that. So we need to be careful. And I know all of us today here are hopefully Christians and living that life. We can each improve. We can each do better. But when we come in contact with someone that isn't, like the Lazarus, the beggar, whoever we see, we need to show a little love and show them they need Christ too. Everybody that we come in contact with, we don't want them going to this place, the place of torment, the place of fire. We don't want them to that. So, as I said, I want to grab them, I want to snatch them any way we can. So, if that's our mission, God will help us with that mission. Okay, we need to make that our mission. And it may not, to you, it may not seem anything, but it may be to God. Calling somebody, wishing them a good day, checking on them, seeing how they're doing. All of us can do that. Emailing, texting, whatever. Go by our neighbors if we know that something's going on next door, and what's going on, can I help, do things. Whatever God lays it on your heart, that's what we need to do. And that's what I had today for the message for the Lazarus and the beggar. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it calls us to understand a little deeper and a little more about what we need to do in our lives. Because as we talked about last week, time's getting short. Time's getting very short. And we need to try to grab everybody we can and tell them we want to walk on gold with them.